morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. We will begin, as always, with our prayer of surrender and then on to our devotion. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. So today's devotion is called The Dance Between Effort and Ease. Here's our affirmation. Today I understand that resting is not being lazy. It's being prudent and taking care of my physical temple. So the text reads, good yoga teachers will always use a specific strategy in their classes. They will take you through a few challenging poses where you have to expend a lot of energy, maybe get your heart rate up a bit, and have to work to keep your balance in order to stay in the pose. And then they'll go into what is called a restful or restorative pose, so you can catch your breath and reestablish your center before going back into poses that require more effort. They call this the dance between effort and ease. And it's also a good way to look at life. You're not always going to be going full steam ahead. So in those times when you feel stuck or like you're in a rut, you might be. But you might also just be in a phase of ease, gathering your strength and preparing for whatever is coming next. So I want to stop right here and mention, you remember a few weeks ago, I think we talked about the lady who had the moon phase thing that she did in her life, where the 2 weeks where the moon was getting bigger, she used that as her active weeks. And then at the full moon, she would stop and take stock of whatever her goals were, and then the 2 weeks that the moon was waxing, when it was getting bigger, she was pulling everything in, and then as it wanes and gets smaller, she uses that as her rest period. This is the same idea. That's that dance between effort and ease. You're not always laying around doing nothing, but you're not always going 100 miles an hour either. Taking time out to rest now and then is not being lazy. It also doesn't mean we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. Resting is an action, and pacing yourself is an important component of self-care. And then the scripture Ecclesiastes 3:1 is quoted, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. So here's our ending prayer. God of the in-between times, help me understand that sometimes the best thing I can do for you, myself, and others is to take care of myself by experiencing a time of rest. Amen. All right, excellent information there, and it connects to what we're going to be talking about today in a roundabout way. We're going to be talking a little bit about walking that line and finding the middle way. But before we get into me explaining where my inspiration for the teaching or what I'm going to share with you today came from, let's repeat our connection affirmation together. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Amen. So as y'all know, I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I take in a lot of information. And yesterday morning, while I was eating breakfast, I was just kind of mindlessly watching this YouTube video, but it was produced by the History Channel. The History Channel actually has a YouTube channel. And so I was watching this video about Peter the Great, who was the Tsar of Russia way back in the 1600s. And I won't spend a lot of time going into a ton of details about what the video was about, although it was very interesting, the whole thing. The main thing is what it made me remember which is a teaching I had previously done called The Road to Hell is Paved with Good Intentions. And I'm going to reshare some of that information from that teaching with you today. But first, I'll give you just a really short history lesson. Basically, Peter the Great had become the Tsar of Russia at a very young age, and he didn't actually know what he was doing. For a time, he even shared the throne with his older half-brother Ivan, which gave him the opportunity to travel over to European countries to see how they ran things, because his older brother was the one at home currently sitting on the throne. And so when he got to Europe, he realized just how far behind the rest of what was then the civilized world Russia was. Russia was a huge country, but because of its geography, especially how the countries were configured at this time, it was very isolated and largely undeveloped, but the people didn't know it. They thought they were the height of culture and intelligence and technology. So when Peter the Great goes traveling abroad, he's in for a little bit of a rude awakening as to how backward his country actually is, and how out of date their customs are as compared to Europe. So when he gets home, he does something very dramatic. He stands in the middle of the Kremlin in Moscow, and he proceeds to pull out a razor and shave off the beards of all the noblemen and the military officers who have come to welcome him home. So, needless to say, they were stunned and somewhat offended, but no one questioned them. One, because he was the Tsar. Two, because he was 6 feet 7 inches tall. He was a very intimidating man. And three, he had a razor very close to their neck. So nobody asked him a bunch of questions. He just did this. And this is what the video said about why he did it. It says, when he returns from Europe, Peter is clean-shaven, as is the fashion in Europe. However, all the Russian men were bearded, but it was more than just a fashion choice for them. Beards had a religious significance in Russia. They were tied to a man's piety and self-respect. A famous Russian priest once said, "To shave the beard is a sin that all the martyrs cannot cleanse." Now, I think that's a tad dramatic to put that much significance on, a beard, but it was the 17th century. So Peter is convinced that these long beards on the men around him, the royal advisors, the wealthy noblemen, the military officers, and the religious officials, he is convinced that this represents the old Russia, and he wants to begin something new. He wants a clean slate for the country. So he realized that in order to transform Russia, he had to get rid of the old traditions and superstitions, and shaving the men's beards, which might seem like an insignificant or even silly thing by today's standards, was a drastic move at that time that cut the ties the men had with their very identity, with who they were. The video said, with this act, Peter the Great literally held a knife to the throat of Russia and said, "Westernize or else." And after this, Peter proceeded to almost single-handedly drag his country out of relative obscurity and onto the world stage. Okay, so that's the story that kind of caught my attention yesterday morning. And I want to make one more point about it before we get into the meat of the teaching, because this is the part that made me think of the phrase and the title of the former teaching, "The Road to Hell is paved with good intentions." Now, arguably, what Peter the Great was trying to do was a good thing. At least it was in his mind, okay? His intention was to modernize his country, to make it more competitive with Europe, which he considered to be more advanced than Russia in every way. He thought he was helping, but listen to this part. After the initial beard shaving incident, Peter sets about making numerous other changes to Russian culture and government, ruling the country with an iron fist. Peter the Great created the Russian concept and culture of a single, strong leader who feels empowered to dictate almost every aspect of life. he set the precedent of a strong, authoritarian ruler who is able to intervene in people's lives in the most seemingly minute ways. After Peter the Great's reign, Russia is no longer this landlocked, isolated nation. They have a seat at the table along with Europe. But there are also long-lasting consequences. Russia's string of authoritarian rulers continues into the present. There is a line to be drawn from the Russia of today, now a major player on the world stage, back to that day in 1698 when a 6'7" autocrat with a razor stepped into a crowd of bearded noblemen and created, by force, the new face of Russia. So, there it is. He thought he was doing good, and in his mind it was a necessary thing he was doing. He had good intentions. But he had also set some not so good precedents, which we call unintended consequences. You know, sometimes when you do something, even if you feel it's good, it has unintended consequences. And the particular unintended consequences and precedents he set then, the whole world is still living with and having to deal with today. Think about what's going on in our world today with Russia. We're still dealing with what he did way back then. So let's take a closer look now at good intentions and perhaps their unintended consequences. I'm going to start with some quotes. The first one, people with good intentions make promises, but people with good character keep them. Okay? All right, this next one is one I've given you before, and it's kind of a tongue twister. Your talk talks and your walk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk talks. All right. So walking your talk is more important than talking your talk. Why? Because you can say anything you want to, but no one will believe the things you say unless they see that they are backed up by your actions. Now, our first quote began with the line, people with good intentions make promises. So basically, people with good intentions say or can say a lot of things. They can make a lot of promises. But those promises don't mean anything unless they are followed up with action. And that's the second line of the quote. But people with good character keep them, referring to the promises. Now, I'm assuming that all of us want to be people who have good character. I know I do. So that means I can't just talk a good game. I have to live a good game through my actions if I want to have any degree of integrity with myself and with others. So that phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Let's talk about what that really means, because I think all of us have good intentions. Let's briefly define our terms. The word hell is in that phrase. And hell, as we've talked about before, is not a physical place where the devil lives and where bad people go after they die. Hell is a state of mind that is created by us right here on earth. It is a consciousness you can live in, or you can choose to walk out of and not live in, no matter what is happening around you in your external world. The best definition I can give is that hell is a lack of love and inner peace. Okay, so that's what hell is. It's when you don't have when there's no love in your life, or you don't feel love, you can't give love, and there's no peace. Next on our list of terms, what are good intentions? The dictionary defines good intentions or intention, singular, as an act or instance of determining or focusing mentally upon some action or result, a positive purpose or attitude toward the effect of one's action or conduct. So we all have good intentions, most of the time anyway. Sometimes we slip into having bad intentions when we're angry. But most of the time, we want good things for ourselves and for everybody else. And actually, most of the time when we have bad intentions, they come from some situation or person doing or saying something against our good intentions. I know that might sound confusing, so let me say it like this. We all have opinions and beliefs about what we think is good, right, and true. And when anything comes into our reality that seems to oppose those opinions and beliefs, we tend to label that thing as bad, because that's what we do here in this realm of duality on earth. We label, we judge, because we have eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And until we get back to the mindset that comes from the tree of life instead, we're going to continue to do this. So, little side note here. Where does that lead? This judgment, this labeling of things. That is the road that leads to ego. It is created, and it is created in our mind. It does not come from our heart. Let me read you a quick passage from Andrew Martin and what he says about this. He says, "You have been trying so hard to live from your ego, from the limited self that still believes in scarcity and lack and actually finds comfort there. But here's the thing." So I think I've said this to you before. When I'm listening to Andrew Martin, I love when he says, "But here's the thing," because I know something great's going to follow that. He says, "The mind doesn't care whether or not you are happy." Have you ever thought about that? Okay. The mind doesn't care if you're thriving. That's not its purpose or mission. All the mind cares about is that you are in a reality where you can read a script and play a role that it can predict inside and out, front to back, beginning, middle, and end. The mind likes it when you stay small and comfortable because that is what is predictable to it. So the most important thing to your mind is that it can predict what's coming, not that you're happy, okay? However, your comfort zone isn't always comfortable. It's just familiar. All right, so you remember a lot of times, a lot of people ask the question, why do women who get abused stay in those marriages? It's not that they're happy, or it's not that they're comfortable. It is that they're comfortable there. They're not happy, but that's their comfort zone because they don't know anything else. We get really familiar with and therefore comfortable in our pain. Ooh, that was an insight right there. But when Spirit comes to us and shows us the way to be free of it, so many of us don't choose that path because we're not willing to go into unfamiliar territory. We get used to being or to wearing the mask of the broken one, the poor one, the unlovable one, the needy one, the angry one, the sick one, the excluded one, the frustrated one, the scared one. But that's not who you really are. That is who you have believed yourself to be, all right? So that's the mask you have become comfortable wearing. All right, so that's the end of the passage from Andrew. Now let me expand on it a little. He's saying that when we label ourselves, number one, it's always coming from the mind, from the ego, and not from our soul or spirit or heart. And number two, that's not who we really are, because who we truly are must come from our heart. He also adds that the mind/ego doesn't have our best interest or our highest good at heart. So that's a funny way to describe it. It's a little bit of a play on words. We always say that this person or that person doesn't have your best interest at heart. Well, because that's not coming from the heart. When it's coming from the mind, it's not. They don't have your best interest at heart because it's not coming from their heart. All right. So he's saying all the mind cares about is predictability. So don't depend on it for your happiness, your peace, or your ability to thrive. He described it like this, which I thought was funny. He said, it's like trying to look for your email on your calculator. He said that's not where you find it. It's like, it's not that, you're not looking hard enough. It's that you're never going to find it there because that's not what the mind's function is. All right, so all the mind cares about is homeostasis, is staying where it can predict what's going on, is control. So I'm going to add this to what he said. Because we are so used to labeling ourselves, and because we are so comfortable behind our own masks, and then he lists a few: brokenness, poverty, unlovableness, neediness, anger, sickness, frustration, fear, etc. Because we do that all the time, and that's our mode of behavior toward ourselves, we also do that to others. We like to label others and put them in boxes and categories that we see them through, because that's what we do to ourselves. So one of the most fundamental principles in all the world religions is some form of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do, as you would have done unto you, or as you would have them do unto you. So most of us say that that is a life principle that we aspire to follow. But do we do that? Listen closely. It doesn't say do unto others as you do unto yourself. It says do unto others as you would have done to yourself, or in plainer English, what you would like to have done to you. Okay, so not how you treat yourself, but how you would like to be treated. The premise is to treat others as you want to be treated by them. But that is not the reality of what a lot of us do. Instead, we do unto others exactly what we do to ourselves. We judge them and we label them. It's very similar to the concept of loving ourselves first that we talk about. You know, you can't really love someone else until you first love yourself. So this is the same principle. You can't stop labeling and judging others until you first stop labeling and judging yourself. But let's get back to good intentions for a minute. When we believe in something, this thing, this belief, this process, this religion, whatever it is, this way of being, when we believe whatever it is we believe to be good, then we judge and label everything and everyone else we see as the opposite of that or as different from it as bad, which is a good way to become stuck in life. Down here in this very low level of vibration, believing that everyone must believe exactly as you do because you're right and your beliefs and your opinions are the only ones that are good, right, and true. And they may be, but here's the thing, as Andrew would say. The way you go about living and expressing or defending those beliefs and opinions matters. And even if what you believe you're standing up for is good and righteous and true, if in the process of standing up for that thing or broadcasting that belief to the general public because you believe it's the best way to live, if in that process you hurt or judge or label or worse, discredit and negate others, then that good, righteous, true intention gets a little tainted, doesn't it? All right, so let's go back to Peter the Great. What he wanted to accomplish was good. It was progress for his people. But going about it in this heavy-handed way by brute force was probably not the best way. And as a consequence, it set into motion some ugly and difficult unintended consequences, as we discussed earlier, that have lasted for centuries now. So if we consider ourselves spiritual people, then we should endeavor to live by spiritual principles, okay? And what is the most important spiritual principle? What I just got finished alluding to, loving others as yourself and treating them as you want to be treated. And if we break that, the most fundamental of all spiritual principles, does anything else we say or do really matter, okay? Will we ever get someone who we believe to be on the other side of some issue from us to come over to our side or to even see or acknowledge the point we're trying to make if we don't show them love or at least respect in the process? If all we do is judge them and label them and tell them their belief is wrong and unacceptable, then that's not doing any good. All that does is create hell, the lack of love and the lack of peace. So even when our intentions are good, if we don't express them or demonstrate them, live them out in a way that is loving to others, then we have gained nothing and we are going down the road to hell. Now, I want to read you something by Amanda Ellis that she wrote way back in 2020. She says, I keep hearing the thought in my head that there is no going any further or getting past the point where we are now until we get a few things sorted and fully understand some spiritual principles that we must begin following if we're going to move beyond the current level we're on as a species. A lot of us, not everybody, but a lot of us are stuck. Some people understand the spiritual principles I'm about to speak of, but they are still compartmentalizing different parts of their lives, following these spiritual principles only when it suits them, and at other times, living their lives as if those principles don't apply. For example, when they begin to discuss politics, and she uses this as her example which I'm not going to get into, but it could be any topic that is divisive, that divides people. She says, when politics comes up, for some reason, people of all the spiritual principles they say they believe in and try to emulate in their lives seem to go out the window. All right, so I'm going to take a time out here and just give you a few examples of things like this I have witnessed personally. One I heard about firsthand and one I saw on the internet. So the first example is years ago, back in the 1980s, a young man came to speak at our church. I was in my early 20s at the time, and he was in his late 20s. His father was a pastor of one of our networking churches from up north. And his father had come down and spoken for us, and he was friends with my Uncle Earl, and he was really keen for his son to meet me. I think his ulterior motive was to join the two families, and he really wanted his son to marry me. So he asked Uncle Earl if his son could come down and speak. And so the guy really didn't want to be a pastor. He wanted to be a politician. But he was comfortable speaking in public, and his dad was a pastor, so Uncle Earl said, okay, yeah, I'll give him a chance to speak. So I'll admit I was really into it at first. I had seen a picture of him, and he was really tall and had brown eyes, and I thought he was handsome. And he had called me on the phone a few times, and he'd even sent me some flowers, and so I was kind of all a Twitter waiting for this visit. But when he got here, and the family began to engage him in conversation, we very quickly realized that our politics, which is what he was most interested in, were very different from his. He was extremely conservative and a very vocal Republican. Nothing wrong with that. However, my family had always, leaned a little bit more to the left and had mostly voted for Democrats. So it was a little bit of a rub, but, I could get past that. Until the topic of abortion came up. And he made a statement that actually just kind of made my blood run cold and completely changed my opinion of who he was as a person. He was obviously pro-life, and that's fine. I and my family had and still have no argument with that, with people who that's their belief. That's great. We may feel differently, but we do not judge other people that have that belief. So we had no issue with him being very vocally pro-life until we were going to agree to disagree until he said this one thing. He said, we were just having a conversation at the table, and he says, I wouldn't personally bomb an abortion clinic, but I wouldn't lose any sleep over it if someone else did. And at that point, I was like, I'm out. That is a line that got crossed. I mean, let's follow the logic here. You are anti-abortion supposedly because of your belief that all life is sacred. Yet you obviously don't hold the lives of those doctors and nurses and anybody else who would be in the clinic at the time sacred if you're not going to lose any sleep if someone goes and bombs it. So it made no sense, and it defeated what it just showed to me a little bit of a lack of integrity and extremism that I didn't want to be any part of. So I swiped left on him before that was even a thing. I was like, sayonara. Dodged a bullet there. So example number 2. I was on the phone a couple of years ago with an old friend of mine who now lives in another state, and she was telling me about a situation that had recently happened in her family. A family member of hers tragically and suddenly passed away, and as families do, at a time like that, they all began to gather at the house of the person who had died to comfort his spouse and children. In this case, it was his wife. And eventually, someone noticed that the father of the woman who was the wife, who had just lost her husband, he wasn't there. And so they began to ask, where's this man? And sadly, the reason that was given by his wife, that was because he didn't come because his son was there. And his son was not vaccinated. And this man had a big issue with that, and he was choosing this time and this event to take a stand on this subject. In other words, he would not come comfort his own daughter, who had just tragically lost her husband, because he didn't want to be in the same room with his son, her brother, because he had not had a shot. So His philosophical disagreement with his son over this issue was more important to him than being there for his daughter at the worst moment of her life. Now, I know many people feel very strongly that everyone should get vaccinated. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion on that. And this opinion, of course, this argument was much more front and center several years back. But it's still a thing. But let's dig a little deeper into the psychology of this, of why this happened. Presumably because the man, that father, wanted the best for everyone, including himself. He wanted the best for his kids. So this qualified in his mind as a good intention, which it was. But how was it expressed? In a way that made his family, both his daughter and his son, feel loved and cared for, like he had their best interest at heart? No, not even close. In fact, I doubt this young woman will ever get over the fact that her father did not come to her house that day. So crazy extremism is no respecter of persons. I just gave you an example from the right as well as the left. Both extremes can get crazy and have good intentions that are not expressed correctly. Okay, example number 3, I saw a video years ago when all the pandemic was at its height, where these 2 older white women were about to get on an elevator. But when the doors opened and they saw a young black man already on the elevator, they began to accost him and scream at him. Not because he was black, because he wasn't wearing a mask. So they went on and on about how he was putting them in danger, and they were both masked, so I'm not sure why, if they really believed in masks that much, I'm not sure why they were concerned, but they were literally demanding that he get off the elevator, okay, when he was there first, and he hadn't reached his floor yet. And the most ironic thing was that toward the end of the exchange, one of them yelled at him, "Black Lives Matter." And I'm sure that if she was trying, I'm not sure what she was trying to get across, that his black life mattered to her, so that's why she wanted him to be wearing a mask, or maybe she was just trying to show him, I'm not one of those crazy racist white women, but she just yelled this into the elevator as the doors were trying to close. And it was actually very comical. He was extremely patient with them and more polite than a lot of people would have been to them. He kept trying to push the button that closes the door, and they just kept sticking their hands in and continuing to yell at him. And you would think, if this is really about you don't want him breathing on you, wouldn't you just let the door close and get the next elevator? So obviously they were not concerned about their health or his health. They just wanted to make the point, what you're doing is bad, and I'm good, and you need to behave like I'm behaving. So, what did we say earlier that hell is? The total lack of peace and love. There was nothing about what they were doing that was peaceful or loving toward that young man. So their good intentions were paving the road to hell, or to a hell in this case, because their actions did not match their words. Like we said earlier, you can say anything you want to say, but if your actions don't back it up, it's not a good intention. I'm fairly sure that young man did not come away from that experience at all thinking his life or his choices mattered to them. So there you have 3 examples of good intentions being expressed badly, and therefore pretty much nullifying any good they could have done. I'm going to go back to Amanda Ellis now. She says, whenever I release a video with political subject matter or talk about anything to do with social justice, I always get a few comments asking why I'm even touching on politics if this is supposed to be a spiritual channel. And this is because, as I said, people are compartmentalizing and thinking that the spiritual path and all it teaches, the principles of non-judgment, forgiveness, compassion, understanding, and love, don't apply when it comes to talking about politics. But truly, all parts of life are an expression of spirit. And so to think that we can behave in a certain way in one situation and then suddenly put our spiritual hat on when we're in another setting really makes a mockery of our divine essence, which we should recognize within ourselves all of the time, or at least as much of the time as we can. So then she talks for a bit about how she sometimes gets criticized by her followers on Facebook and YouTube for deleting certain comments that people post under her videos. They accuse her of deleting the comments that she disagrees with. And she spends some time explaining that it's not that, but rather that because she does consider herself a spiritual teacher and her channel a spiritual channel, she will not allow any comments that slander other people or that disrespect other people on a personal level. She's perfectly fine with comments of disagreement as long as they stick to the subject matter at hand and don't devolve down into personal insults. She also admits that she deletes threads where people decide to take each other on, as often happens online, in the comment section and argue endlessly with each other to the point where it becomes fruitless because that's not the energy that she wants on her page. And because she's one of those people who tries to live by her spiritual principles all the time, no matter what subject she's talking about, not just the specific subject of spirituality itself. Which is so funny to me how some people, the whole purpose for spirituality is to teach you or to have some kind of framework to live your life by. But then people, when they get out to live their lives, they just want to go talk about the spiritual things, but they don't want to live them out when they are in real life. So she concludes by stating that there's a difference between the freedom to express your opinion and even disagree with others respectfully in a civil manner and having it devolve into name-calling and personal attack. There's nothing spiritual about that, she says, and I wholeheartedly agree with her. All right, now, for the ending of this, I want to tell you a story about a woman who lives in Great Britain and what happened to her as a result of a group of people on the internet who had good intentions. Something that's very important to understand in any situation is context. And that has been all but lost these days among people who are part of cancel culture. The context in which things are said or written matters. And that's the problem with judging and labeling. It's often done without any regard for the context in which it was said or written. So this woman's name is Kate Clancy. She is a teacher, a poet, a playwright, a multi-prize winning author. And up until 2021, she was one of the most celebrated modern day literary figures in the United Kingdom, especially noted for her work with and support of young poets and writers. But as of January 2022, her books stopped being published by her previous publishing company. Now, how did this happen? We find out in excerpts from an interview she did. So the interviewer is speaking, and he says, Kate has been a teacher and a writer since 1995. Her first book of poetry came out in 1996. So she's not a rookie. She's been at this for a little bit. For more than a decade, she taught in a very multicultural school of children ranging from middle school to high school age, many of whom had been born in different countries or whose parents had been. So basically, the majority of her students were either first-generation British people or their parents had been first-generation. In 2018, she published a book of poetry written by her students, mostly recent migrants from other countries. When it first came out, it got a wonderful reception from the general public as well from the literary critics. The following year, in 2019, she published a personal memoir of her life containing lots of stories about the children she had taught over the years and what she had learned from them about their cultures of origin and their experience of integrating into British culture. She wrote it in a manner that highlighted her personal experience of being from a middle-class British family and the many stereotypes that had been part of that culture about the various cultures these children, her students, had come from. She described in the book how having personal relationships with these children had served to change or debunk many of the things she had previously believed as a result of her own upbringing and cultural lens. All right, so time out. Here's a woman born and raised in a middle-class British home who admittedly had certain opinions about cultures other than her own because that was the lens she had been given by her family and her culture, her community. So she writes a book about her experience of being a teacher at this multicultural school, and as a result, coming into close contact with people from these other cultural backgrounds, which subsequently had changed how she thought about these cultures. So that's a beautiful story, right? Okay, you would think, but you would be wrong. The book comes out in 2019, and everyone loves it. But then in 2020, some people online who did not know how to mind their own business started to take issue with her book, as well as the book she'd published of her students' poems, accusing her of exploiting the students, appropriating their culture, and being a racist because of some of the language she used to describe her students. They claimed she had exoticized her students and that her book only served to further oppress cultures who were already being oppressed and marginalized in England. So she tells a story in her memoir about trying to get some of her students back in the 1990s to talk about their heritage and where their families had come from, because she thought it would be interesting to the other students, the ones who had grown up in Britain, to understand this. But she couldn't get the migrant children to talk. So she soon realized it was because they desperately wanted to fit in with the British culture because they were under tremendous pressure to do so. So in this section of the book, she referred to one young man as having an Ashkenazi nose. Ashkenazi being a particular sect of Jewish people. So the context is she wrote a description of him of being something he was very self-conscious of and even ashamed of, because it was a physical identifier of him as other than British. But she wanted and tried in her capacity as a teacher to instill in him the idea that the shape of his nose is something he should be proud of. Okay? So she stated in the interview, "What I meant in writing that description was, you lovely kid, can't you see what a unique and amazing heritage you have? You should be proud of it." The exact quote from the book is, "I was baffled when a boy with jet black hair and eyes and a fine Ashkenazi nose refused to identify at all with his Jewish heritage." And for that, she was accused by her online detractors of racial profiling. She went on to explain that she had so many discussions with her students over the years about why they didn't want to identify their cultural backgrounds, and how she tried to show them the beauty of their diversity and give them a safe place to discuss their challenges, as well as the positive experiences they were having as immigrants themselves or as the children of immigrants. At one point, the man who was interviewing her said, "I suppose it's now taboo to mention anything about one's physical appearance as it relates to their cultural background. Even an affectionate and positive description seems to be politically incorrect. Is that where we are now?" And she answers, "In my experience, yes." Now, I know I'm getting pretty deep into this, but I promise you it's for a reason. I want to read one more exchange from this woman as she was being interviewed to show the context of where she was coming from, what her intention was, and why she even wrote this book. She says, "During the teenage years in school, there's nothing that children worry more about than their appearance. Schools are very physical places, and the teen years are very critical in the development of your self-esteem regarding your physical appearance. In every school, but most especially in a multicultural school, everyone looks different, especially in the south of England, where there are very recent migrants from every continent around the globe. And at this age, they want two things that seem to contradict each other. They want to fit in and be accepted as British citizens, and they also want their differences to be acknowledged and to be seen as individuals. Every encounter is a delicate dance, okay? Remember we talked about the dance between effort and ease? Every encounter is a delicate dance between these two desires, and it is even more difficult for immigrant children. I tried in this book to take my readers through some of the journeys that I had embarked on as a teacher. I learned, for example, that instead of being worried or troubled by or being attractive enough or having acne, as some teachers would be, one of my students was terrified of looking too Somalian. In fact, it was the biggest trauma of his life because he feared that his appearance and people's perception of his culture might endanger his family's visa status. That was not something I had ever thought of before, and I felt it was an important story to include in the book so that the others could share the experience and imagine that pain, maybe causing them to rethink some of their own stereotypes and perceptions. So, here's a woman who obviously cares deeply about her students and has not only tried to educate them academically, but she has tried to provide them with a safe place to discuss their challenges, both in school and just in their normal life, not just the part that relates to their schooling. And she's also confronted some of her own perceptions and changed the ones that she'd been taught that she found through her own experience were wrong. So she challenged her own perceptions that she'd had going into this experience. She had been an advocate to her students up to the point where she had gotten a whole book of their poems published. And so there's the context. Now, here's the rest of the story to what happened to her career and to her personal reputation in the space of 1 year. Now, she's been doing this since 1995. So 20 years later, this is what happened to her. So this group of people decided they were going to express themselves and their good intentions online. So here's one more thing that she says concerning the context of her book and the situation she was attempting to describe. In the book, I never say, this is what this person is. I always say, this is how I perceive this person, and these are my perceptions. But maybe that's not good enough, at least if you don't read all the way to the end of the paragraph. So there it is. The people who were trashing her and trying to cancel her and calling her a racist online, they didn't read the whole paragraph. Therefore, they missed the context. They didn't mention that the end result was that she admitted her perceptions in some cases had been wrong and that she had changed them. They just picked out certain descriptive sentences and phrases that they found offensive, and they took them out of context and made it sound like she was saying something that she was not saying and coming from a place that she was not coming from. Now, they were also doing it in a very hateful manner, and they succeeded. Her book went from being celebrated and winning one of the most prestigious literary prizes in the United Kingdom in 2019 to 2 years later in 2021, her publishing company issuing a public apology on her behalf without her knowledge or approval for her racism and threatening to pull all her books from their catalogs if she attempted to defend herself or dispute what they had said. So all because some people on Twitter, which it was called at the time, didn't like what she had written, and they complained without any context and without telling the whole story. And, it made me think of this. In the Bible it says, don't take up the offense of someone else. The children obviously were not offended, but they were offended on behalf of the children, so they were going to fight this fight for the kids who didn't even want the fight. Okay. So they wrote, so her publishing company puts out this apology for her racism. They didn't tell her ahead of time they were going to do it. They didn't let her be a part of writing it. And they said, and if you try to correct it or defend it, we're going to take all your books out of our catalog. Now, this is the part that which that ended up happening because she did. She defended herself and she got all her books pulled. But this is the part I really want us to focus on today. Everybody is so quick now to call other people out for things they have supposedly done wrong or for having views that are unacceptable to them because they are different from theirs. And sometimes they think they're doing the right thing. I'm sure these people slept very well at night, completely believing they had defended some kids against a racist teacher. Standing up against racism is a good intention. We would all agree that there's no question to that. But how were they doing it? How are we doing it? Are we rushing to judgment and throwing labels on people out of context and forgetting that they are also a human being? All right, listen to what else was going on in this woman's life during this time. That same year, 2020, both of her parents had died. Okay, so she's going through the grief of losing both her parents, and then this happens. She says this of how all of it affected her. They forgot that I was a human being altogether. When I read my publishing company's apology for my supposed racism, I had never been so shaken in all my life. No one spoke to me about it directly. They just issued the apology on my behalf. That night, I decided to kill myself, and I had never ever thought like that before. I think I'm a pretty resilient person, but I was astonished by the strength of that idea, the idea of actually committing suicide. I have children, so I didn't do it, but I shocked myself at how close I came. People were accusing me of something I fundamentally hate and have always fought against, racism, and there was nothing I could do about it. As a writer, to have my words disordered and taken out of context and to have all my books disparaged and discarded was devastated. Twitter is a lot like a play with characters. People entirely forget that they're speaking to or about an actual person. There is absolutely no empathy there anymore. And that was the end of her quote. So, empathy, putting yourself in another person's place, walking a mile in another's shoes, doing unto others as you would have done unto you. That seems to be sorely missing in much of society today, even by people who consider themselves spiritual and even by people who have good intentions. At the end of the interview, the host, back around to this topic of good intentions, here's a point that he made, which is the point that I've also been trying to make today. He said, what's so confusing about this and about what those people did is that it was coming from a good instinct, or at least in theory. The prosecution of something that's bad, racism, the protection of vulnerable groups, these migrant children, and yet the ultimate effect was so vicious. So here's a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. A couple of sentences expounding on it by this guy that I heard say this. His name is Aubrey Marcus. The quote is this: whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster himself. And so then Aubrey Marcus, he writes this: to everyone who has been slandered, ridiculed, censored, and canceled for voicing what you believe in, I hear you. I know you are angry. I know that some part of you seeks vindication, and this impulse is only human. But acting from that place will not create the world we are fighting for. The rage or outrage is important, but it is meant to be alchemized into determination, art, and the fire that is the forge of our spirit. I love how he said that. It's okay to have strong opinions and to voice those opinions and to stand up for what you believe in. But you've got to remember that we're never going to have the end result we want, a new earth that's more like heaven, by creating hell, which is what we do when we do this in ways that do not promote peace and love. You can't get there from here, and you don't need to become a monster in order to fight monsters. If we do that, we only end up with more monsters. So, lastly, Amanda Ellis reminds us of the importance of that, but also warns us of the difficulty of choosing this middle way, or something she refers to as sacred neutrality. She says the difficulty of choosing the middle way is that extremists on both sides only see the enemy behind you. All right, so let's get this visual. If people over here at this extreme and they're looking at you who's in the middle, they're not seeing you in the middle. All they're seeing is this other side behind you that they disagree with. Same thing from this side. So guess what? People on both ends of the spectrum believe that their intentions are good, okay? So, because so often the way these two groups of people choose to walk those intentions out creates hell because they're not speaking the truth in love as the Bible instructs us to do, then it becomes hell because they're not doing it in a way that is loving. It's not, and it is not really accomplishing anything. Amanda says it's very easy to get entrenched into a particular position, even when you're trying to walk the middle path. And let me say this about what the middle way is not. It is not that you don't have an opinion about anything. This is a great misunderstanding that somehow if you've chosen the middle way, you're just sitting on the fence with no opinion as some sort of blank slate. That is not my understanding of sacred neutrality. You can absolutely have opinions on all sorts of subjects. In fact, you must, because you're a human being and not a robot. You're going to feel strongly about things. You are meant to react and to interact with the world, but you must stay open to both sides of the debate, whatever it is. There is a proviso to that, however, which involves boundaries. I'm open to hear you as long as you're respectful. Every single person on our planet has something to contribute to the collective debate, and as long as they speak respectfully, they have a right to be heard. We must remember that in the end, we all belong to each other, and we all need each other. And that's the end of her quote. So on that note, I want to end with a thought from a series that I watched a while back on Netflix called Connected, where this researcher goes all around the world showing how everyone and everything is connected. And when we forget that, that's when we start expressing our good intentions badly, which only creates for us and for everyone around us hell on earth. So it's okay to have good intentions, but the way we express them and walk them out makes all the difference. In this particular episode, the researcher travels to the middle of the Sahara Desert and goes to a place that used to be covered by water thousands and thousands of years ago, but now is dried up. In fact, it is considered the driest place on earth. But what remains there still are skeletons and the detritus that used to be the fish and the crocodiles and even the algae that once lived and swam in the waters. Because it's so dry, they're kind of perfectly preserved. And so every year, a little more of that, what they call fossilized dust, gets blown by the winds, strong winds, all the way across the earth until it reaches the Amazon rainforest. Now, there are no two more opposite places on earth than the Sahara Desert and the Amazon rainforest. And for the purpose of our analogy today, in light of our teaching, you can picture those two places as the extremes that currently exist in our culture and society. So here's a little piece from the show. The ecosystems of very different regions of the earth are strongly interconnected. Thousands of tons of Saharan desert dust are blown regularly all the way to the Amazon rainforest. An interesting fact about the Amazon region is that the soil is very infertile because the rain is constantly washing away the nutrients. Like phosphorus. But guess what else contains phosphorus? These fossilized corpses of the long dead residents of the now dry lake basin in the Sahara Desert. Every year, an estimated 22,000 tons of Saharan phosphorus lands in the Amazon rainforest, almost exactly the amount that it loses due to rain and flooding. So, the dust that falls from the sky replenishes what gets washed away. Without this dust, the Amazon may not have what it needs to keep going. Dust from the Sahara Desert actually keeps the rainforest region stable. So without the world's driest, most desolate place, the world's most vital and vibrant place wouldn't be what it is. Out of death comes life. Every creature makes its own contribution. The dust of the dead skeletons contribute to the life of another biodiversity on the other side of the planet. That's the beauty of nature. And that's how the show ended. I almost cried when I heard them say, out of death comes life. You know, it's like, and this one extreme place over here, if this other extreme place didn't have it, it couldn't even survive. So that's the balance. That's the equilibrium. We need diversity. We can't all be the same. And we shouldn't all be the same. Our whole society works because we are different. And once we remember that, once we appreciate that and respect that, perhaps we'll stop trying so hard to force our piece of the puzzle, that unique piece we have to contribute, onto everyone else. Because no matter how good our intentions, if we're not living, speaking, and interacting with each other in a loving way, we're only paving the road to hell, a place without love and a place without peace. So let's get back to the most basic, fundamental spiritual principle: loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, and treating everyone, no matter how different their opinions and beliefs are from ours, the way we want to be treated. Simple, not always easy, but that is the middle way. And in the end, it is a very rewarding and perfectly balanced way. Amen?
Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen.